Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here. I know your time is valuable, so I promise I'll make sure we use it well. Just want to make sure, can everyone hear me all right? Please let me know in the chat, and we'll get started. I am going to keep talking. If you can't hear me, please do let me know. So this is part of a series that we're calling Freight Unfiltered. The name is intentional. The whole idea is to take an honest, no spin look at every major mode of transportation: air, ocean, trucking, rail. Not to sell you on any of them, but to give you a clear picture of where each one actually works and where it doesn't. Because here's the thing: when we recommend a specific mode for your shipment, we want that recommendation to actually mean something to you. Not just, oh, trust us, SGL knows what we're talking about, but a real understanding of why. And that starts with webinars like these, educational opportunities, not just a sales pitch. So I'm going to start a poll now and talk a little bit about the questions we'll be answering today's agenda, and then we'll kick off. So I just started a poll. When do you typically consider using air freight? So please feel free to look at those questions, answer them based on your own experiences, and I will talk a little bit about how today's going to work. We'll be talking about air freight, of course, and I'll be straight with you. Air freight has a bit of a complicated reputation. For most people, it's the expensive option, the panic button, the mode you only reach for when something has gone sideways. And honestly, that reputation makes companies make the same two mistakes over and over. They either avoid air freight entirely, or they use it at the exact worst possible time. When rates are highest, options are limited, and they're basically at the mercy of whoever will take their cargo. But the reality is way more interesting than that, because air freight can be a genuinely useful tool when it's used intentionally. In the right situation, it can protect inventory, prevent stockouts, stabilize supply chains, and even reduce your total logistics cost when you stop only looking at the freight rate. So today we'll be talking for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have a quick 5-minute Q&A right at the end. And you can also use the Q&A for questions then, or you can use the chat for questions. I have some colleagues from SGL here in the chat today, so if a question does come up during the presentation that you don't want to wait until the Q&A for, go ahead and drop it in the chat and they'll jump on it. They'll also be answering our Q&A questions later on. But today, we're going to give you the real picture on air freight: the good, the bad, and the misunderstood. Let's get into it. And I'm looking at the poll results now, and it looks like the vast majority of you who voted have voted that you only use air freight when something is already delayed. And that is a fair point. It's a great emergency option, but there are so many more ways that you can benefit from using air freight outside of just when you have a tight timeline. I want to make sure, though, that we all have the same baseline picture of how air freight actually works before I discuss that, because a few things do tend to surprise people. The first thing is that not all air cargo flies on dedicated freighter planes. For US exports specifically, roughly half of air cargo moves in the belly holds of regular passenger aircrafts, and those are the same planes you and I fly on. The luggage compartment is actually only part of the lower deck, and the rest is often filled with commercial freight. And in the US specifically, only TSA certified known shippers are allowed to move cargo on passenger flights. You also have dedicated freighters, of course, like the Boeing 747 freighter or the 777F, which handle larger, heavier, and more specialized cargo. These are the planes with the nose doors that you've probably seen photos of that swing up over the cockpit and load full pallets directly onto the main deck. Here's something about air freight transit times. The delays almost never happen in the air. The plane is the fast part. It's a plane. It's moving pretty quick. But where things really tend to slow down is on the ground. Pickup, consolidation at origin, and especially customs clearance at destination are where shippers get stuck and where shipments get stuck. And what that means for you as a shipper is that your documentation has to be perfect before the cargo ever leaves your facility. And your carrier also needs to know upfront who your US customs broker is. Because in air freight, everything is optimized for speed, and any gap in that chain is going to cost you. Now let's talk about who actually uses air freight. The list is probably broader than most people expect. You have things that are temperature and time sensitive, things like pharmaceuticals and life sciences, vaccines, biologics, clinical trial samples, Temperature integrity is, of course, non negotiable, so the timelines are often legally binding, and ocean freight just simply isn't an option. You have high tech and electronics. That's semiconductors, components, high value devices. The cost of holding a production line because a critical part is sitting on a container ship for 3 weeks can easily dwarf any air freight premium. Then, of course, you think of fashion and luxury goods, and we're going to talk about something interesting there shortly. But things like seasonal collections, limited run items, in that world, being 2 weeks late to market can mean that you've missed the window entirely. And of course, fresh perishables. We already talked about temperature control, but food, cut flowers, premium seafoods, exotic produce, products just can't survive the transit time by sea. And then the last one I want to talk about is actually one that I think is super fun and something that like probably people are subconsciously aware of, but that you don't really think about. And I think it captures the spirit of air freight better than any business case study, and that is racehorses. When a thoroughbred racehorse worth millions of dollars needs to cross an ocean for a race, there is absolutely no alternative. There's no, we'll figure out another option. The horse has to fly. That's why the term is when pigs fly and not when horses fly, because horses fly all the time. And that is the last bad joke you'll hear from me today, I promise. But the operation is genuinely impressive. They travel in custom-built stalls designed specifically for aircraft, and they're escorted by groomers and veterinarians. The temperature, the noise, and the loading process is all super carefully managed. It's really one of the most extraordinary logistics operations out there. And air freight isn't just fast for any of these kinds of shipments, it's the only option. And that's worth keeping in mind because sometimes speed is the product, and that is definitely the case in air freight. On the flip side, though, bulk commodities, raw materials, heavy machinery, low value consumer goods with no time pressure all rarely make sense for the air because the math just doesn't work. And we'll get exactly into how to run that math in a few minutes. But we're moving on now to busting the air freight myths. And this is honestly my favorite part of any of these webinars because the myths around air freight are stubborn and they're expensive. So let's go through them one by one. First myth, air freight is always too expensive. The reality is that air freight is expensive per kilogram. No one's going to deny that, but expensive per kilogram is not the same as a bad financial decision. Those are two genuinely different things, and I think people often conflate them because they're so focused on the money part. When you factor in what it costs you not to ship something quickly, the cost of carrying extra safety stock, the revenue you lose when you stock out, production downtime when a critical part doesn't arrive, the total picture often looks very different from the freight invoice alone. And here's something a lot of people don't realize. Depending on the size and weight of your shipment, air freight can actually be comparable to LCL ocean. That's, of course, less than container load, once you factor in the minimums and rehandling charges that come with LCL. It's not always the dramatic cost difference that people assume. So the right question to ask is never how much does shipping cost? The right question is what does not shipping cost me? And that mental shift from rate to total cost is the single most important reframe in this entire session, and the one thing I want you to take away from this session if you take away anything. I will be giving you a whole framework around it later in this presentation. Myth number 2, air freight is only for last minute emergencies. Excuse me. Now, this one does have a grain of truth to it because, yes, people absolutely use air freight for emergencies. But here's what most people don't think about. Emergency air freight is the most expensive version of air freight. When you're scrambling at the last minute, you're paying spot rates. You have zero leverage with carriers, and your options are limited. Compare that to a company that's built air freight into their supply chain as a deliberate and planned tool for specific SKUs, specific lanes, or seasonal windows. That company pays far less per shipment, has actual carrier relationships, and has time to consolidate intelligently. Strategic air freight and panic air freight are completely different cost profiles. Because the goal isn't to use air freight less, it's to use it on purpose. The next myth is that only big companies can afford air freight. This comes up a lot with smaller businesses, and it's just not accurate. Air cargo is accessible to companies of any size. And just like ocean freight has LCL consolidation, where smaller shippers share container space, air freight does have equivalent services. Consolidators group shipment together so smaller shippers can access competitive rates they couldn't get alone. Small e-commerce companies ship by air routinely for their fast-moving products, and size of a company just isn't the barrier that people think it is. Myth number 4, air freight is only for small, lightweight items. This is a big one. Wide-body freighters carry full aircraft loads of automobiles. They carry industrial equipment. They carry horses, as we just talked about. The idea that air freight is only for small parcels is just wrong. And what matters isn't the weight itself, it's the relationship between value and weight. And there's a specific pricing concept called chargeable weight that we're going to cover later. But understanding that one thing will completely change how you read air freight quotes. Myth number 5, air freight is too complicated. There are real restrictions on air freight. Hazardous materials, lithium batteries, live animals all have specific rules and certifications required, and that's not a myth. But an experienced freight forwarder handles all of that. It's literally what they do. Know the regulations, prepare the documentation, and manage the customs process. For standard commercial cargo, which is the vast majority of what businesses actually ship, air freight is well understood, well regulated, and completely manageable. And now, before we get into the next portion, I just want to talk about one more misconception worth naming, which is not really a myth, but more of a trap that some companies fall into. And it's called the Donna Karan problem. There's a well-known story in the garment industry about a major fashion label, DKNY, that became famous for air freighting everything. And I mean everything, including full container load equivalent retail shipments with no real deadline, no time-sensitive requirements, no business justification beyond that's how we do it, and that's how we've always done it. And this was back when Donna Karan was still running the company before its acquisition by LVMH. But the lesson is timeless. And that is that air freight had become a default, not a decision. It was a habit and not a strategy. And the cost of that habit was enormous. Air freight used intentionally is a competitive advantage. But when you use it by default, it's just an expensive habit. The difference is whether you made this choice or the choice made itself. But now let's talk about when air freight makes sense and when it doesn't. I want to get specific and walk through the actual situations where air freight makes sense. We have a nice little checklist about this. The first is that time-critical shipments where you can put a number on the cost of delay is something that you definitely want to consider air freight for. It's the clearest case. If a part costs $50 per kilogram to ship by air, but its absence is shutting down a production line that costs $50,000 a day, the math is pretty easy. The same logic applies to contractual deadlines with penalties or a limited window like a fashion week delivery or a seasonal retail launch. Miss the window, miss the revenue. Second, we have high-value, low-weight cargo. Watches, jewelry, premium electronics, pharmaceutical compounds. This is one that often gets overlooked, and that's security. Air cargo has a significantly lower exposure to theft than trucking. Fewer handoffs, tighter chain of custody, and for some high-value categories, insurance premiums are actually lower for air shipments. The cost picture is more nuanced than it first appears. Third, we have inventory gap bridging. You have a top-selling SKU running low, your ocean shipment is 3 weeks out. What does 2 weeks of stock out cost you in lost sales, expedited orders, and customer relationships? For a lot of products, the answer easily justifies an air shipment to bridge the gap. Fourth, of course, perishables and temperature-sensitive cargo. That's flowers, fresh seafood, produce, vaccines, clinical trial materials. These aren't cases where air freight is slower. It's just not, these aren't cases where ocean freight is slower. It's just not viable. Product integrity makes air the only real option. And fifth, payment and Incoterm situations where speed has real financial value. Short expiry letters of credit, or situations where faster delivery means faster invoicing and faster cash receipt. The value of speed is measurable and it shows up on your balance sheet. Now, let's talk about the situations where air freight is the wrong call. Bulk commodities and low-value goods where the freight rate simply exceeds your margin. No amount of speed is going to justify shipping at a loss. Manufactured urgency, this is a big one. If the shipment is urgent because of a forecasting failure or because someone dropped the ball on reordering, air freight is masking the real problem, not solving it. So you can use it if you have to, but you should fix the root cause so you don't have to repeatedly lose money doing so. Default behavior, like the Donna Karen problem. If air has become your standard method out of habit rather than analysis, we just talked about why that doesn't work. And finally, when your shipment's dimensions are going to create a very unfavorable chargeable weight situation. And that brings us to our next segment. However, if you're wondering, should I memorize all these details? We have a handy little guide checklist that you will be receiving via email after the presentation, but it's also on screen now. And that can give you a way to work out whether or not air freight is the best option for your shipment. And the version on screen is a digital version, but we will also be sending out a printer-friendly version. But overall, a lot of unnecessary air freight costs don't come from choosing the wrong mode. They come from waiting too long to make the decision. The emergency surcharge is the most expensive premium in freight. Planning ahead, even for air, will change the economics entirely. But now let's talk about understanding the true cost of air freight. And this is probably the most practically useful part of today's session, especially if you've ever gotten an air freight quote and thought, that can't be right, this shipment doesn't weigh that much. And that is, let's talk about chargeable weight, what it is and how it works. Pull that link down, but if you need it again, let me know in the chat. Here is the key thing. Air freight is never billed on the simple scale weight of your shipment. Carriers build on something called chargeable weight, which is whichever is higher between two numbers. The first number is your actual gross weight, what the shipment weighs on a scale, including packaging and any pallet. The second number is your volumetric weight, also called dimensional weight. This is a calculated figure representing the physical space your shipment takes up on the aircraft. Planes have both weight limits and volume limits, and carriers charge for the space a shipment occupies, not just its mass. This process works the same way an airline might approximate the average size and weight of a passenger's luggage. And the formula is, you multiply length, width, and height in centimeters, and then divide by 6,000. And that will give you volumetric weight in kilograms. The 6,000 divisor specifically is an IATA, that's the International Air Transport Association standard, although it's an arbitrary approximation, and some carriers use 5,000 or 4,000, which results in a higher volumetric weight. Always confirm which one your carrier uses before you budget a shipment. In general, the airline will always charge the weight that yields the highest revenue, whether you are shipping packing peanuts or lead. And here's a concrete example of why this matters. On the left, you see shipment A. It's dense hardware. It has 150 kilograms on the scale, small box, 50 by 40 by 40 centimeters. Run the formula. 80,000 cubic centimeters divided by 6,000 equals about 13 kilograms volumetric weight. You're billed on actual weight, 150 kilograms. That makes sense. Shipment B, that's on the right here, is lightweight but bulky. 40 kilograms on the scale, but the box is 100 by 80 by 60 centimeters. Run the formula again. 480,000 divided by 6,000 equals 80 kilograms volumetric weight. That shipment weighs 40 kilograms on the scale, but you're invoiced for 80 kilograms. This surprises a lot of shippers the first time they see it, because it might feel like the quote is wrong, but your quote isn't wrong. The freight rate is applying to the chargeable weight, not the scale weight. Tighter, more efficient packaging directly reduces your volumetric weight and your invoice. Beyond chargeable weight, I want to also leave you with the concept of total landed cost. The freight invoice is one line item, but the true cost of a supply chain decision includes a lot of other variables. Inventory carrying cost, which is if an air freight means faster replenishment, you may need less buffer inventory sitting in a warehouse. Stockout cost. What does it actually cost when a SKU runs out? Lost sales, expedited retail orders, customer churn. For some businesses, a single stockout event costs more than a full year of air freight premiums on that product. Damage and insurance. Air cargo has fewer handoffs than trucking or ocean. For fragile or high-value goods, lower damage rates and potentially lower insurance costs are the real offsets to the rate difference. And then cash conversion. Faster delivery means faster invoicing, means faster payment. That's working capital value that shows up on your balance sheet, not just your freight invoice. Air freight, I've heard people say air freight looked expensive until we calculated what 2 weeks of stockout cost us in lost sales and expedited orders. The freight invoice turned out to be a smaller number. It's a real conversation we've had with customers endlessly. But the math changes when you look at the whole picture. We cover all of these possibilities in the free transportation guide that we are offering you as part of this attending this webinar. There should be a link on screen now, and like I said, you'll receive a printer-friendly version in an email after the webinar. But let's talk about a 5-question framework that you can actually use. Not just concepts, but a repeatable tool for making this decision going forward. It's 5 questions. Run through them whenever you are deciding whether a shipment justifies air freight premium. Question 1. What does not shipping cost me? Before you even look at the freight quote, put a number on delay. Stock out, production stoppage, missed sales window. What is that actually worth to your business? If you can't answer that question, start by figuring it out. Question 2. Is the urgency real or manufactured? Is this a genuine time-sensitive situation, or did it get urgent because of a planning failure upstream? Both happen. Sometimes urgency is unavoidable, but if it's manufactured, air freight is treating the symptom, not the disease. Question 3. What is the value to weight ratio? High value, low weight, air freight almost always makes sense. High weight, low value, it rarely does. And this is where chargeable weight comes in. Know your numbers before you call for a quote. Question 4. What does total landed cost actually look like? Not just the freight rate. Warehousing, insurance, damage risk, inventory carrying cost, cash conversion. Build the full picture, and it will help you make that decision. Question 5. Is there a strategic window that justifies the premium? New product launch, seasonal deadline, contractual obligation, a key customer relationship that you can't afford to drop the ball on? Sometimes, like I said, speed is the product. And this framework, I just want to be clear, isn't about justifying air freight. Some people will run through these 5 questions and confidently choose ocean, and that might be the right answer for them. The point is that the decision is intentional, based on real numbers, not on habit or reputation. All right, so let's bring everything here together. Air freight is not the enemy of good logistics. Misusing it is. Used strategically and intentionally, it can protect your revenue, reduce your total cost, and keep your supply chain stable in situations where nothing else can. Chargeable weight, not scale weight, is what drives your invoice. So packaging strategy matters more than most people realize. And these 5 questions give you a repeatable way to make this call with confidence, regardless of what your default instinct has been. Before we open it up to questions, I do have a couple things I want to make sure you leave with today. First, I've already mentioned the transportation guide. In your email, you will also receive part 1 of the transportation guide, which is all about rail. So if you learned a lot today and you're like, I want to learn this about other modes of transportation, our rail guide will be attached in that email. And we will be doing another part of this series, which I'll tease in a little bit, so that you can continue learning about all the various methods of transportation. Second, if you'd like to schedule with someone from our team and talk to them about your specific freight situation, whether it's an air freight issue or any other area of transportation, we are offering a free 30-minute consultation as part of your attendance today. There's not going to be any pitch, no agenda, just an honest look at your supply chain and where air freight does or doesn't make sense for you. The link right now is on screen. You can schedule that for free. We would love to help you. SGL USA's team is very experienced. We have 40 plus years of logistics experience. So let us be the one to help you, especially if you are exporting to Japan. We are the experts in that area. Next time in the Freight Unfiltered series, we'll be looking at trucking. We'll have the same format, honest, direct, and focused on helping you making better decisions. That'll be on Thursday, May 7th. If you want a heads up when that goes live, the registration link is on screen right now. And just a reminder, we're going to open up the Q&A right now. I've got colleagues from SGL in the chat who will be happy to answer your questions. So if there's something that has come up in your mind that you want to ask, now is the time. Our team is amazing and so smart, and they would love to answer your questions. So what questions do you have? Please share. I know one question that I would find really interesting to hear from my colleagues, just because I want them to be able to share their expertise, is how do current air lead times compare to ocean on major trade lanes right now? If any of you have some thoughts on that, I would love to hear them from our team. Have someone typing, so just give it a moment. While we're waiting for the answer on that question, I am going to share this, which is for next month's webinar. It's going to be really great. The series has been really helpful. We've gotten a lot of wonderful feedback, and so I would love to see all of you there at next month's webinar. I should have a special guest from our SGL Houston office, but he doesn't know it yet. So. All right, so Ken says that right now it's about 10 to 20 days by ocean and about 1 to 5 days by air freight. So you can really see that difference in timing and in speed. And that's assuming LA to Shanghai. Ken Seki is one of our wonderful team members. He helped me develop this webinar that you're watching today. So thank you so much, Ken. It seems like we don't have any other questions today, but you can always ask questions of our team members in your free consultation. Or if you would like to request a quote, you can go to sglusa.com to request a quote. Thank you so much for coming to today's webinar. We're finishing a little early, so I have a couple of other questions that I know had come up when I was doing my research. So I'm going to field those questions to our team as well. And that's, what's the most common air freight mistake you see shippers make? I'd love to hear about that. This is, I'm adding Ken's answer to the stream about the previous question so that everyone can see it. So Ken has answered, and he says, the biggest mistake is not preparing the documents correctly or not packaging the shipment properly. And I feel like that really speaks to how important it is to make sure all of that is prepared. There's no such thing as over prepared in air freight. It's better to be as completely ready as you can. And thank you so much for that. And then one more I have that I'd love for you to talk about is if a customer seems like they're a great candidate for air, but they're not asking about it, they're not mentioning it, how do you be the one to say, how do you pick up that phone and say, hey, I think you should use air for this shipment? I know that can be a little bit of a hurdle to overcome. The customer's not interested. And for customers, it might be good to hear, why and how that might come up. And this will be our last question unless anyone else in the chat has one. I'm keeping an eye. We have about 30 seconds left, so if we don't get to that question, that's okay. Like I said, we can answer that or any other questions that you have in your free consultation. Thank you so much for attending today, everyone. Really appreciate it. We will see you next month for our webinar, Why It's Just Trucking is a Costly Assumption. So we'll see you there. We're doing an ocean webinar in June, so also keep an eye out for that. And thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Bye.